What if I told you that according to a recent international survey conducted across 47 countries, nearly 68% of the global population has experienced at least one unexplainable paranormal encounter that fundamentally altered their perception of reality? What if I told you that among those witnesses, 34% reported that their experience left them with persistent psychological trauma, sleepless nights filled with an inexplicable dread that something inhuman was still watching them from the shadows of their memory? These aren't ghost stories told around campfires or urban legends passed down through generations. These are documented testimonies from ordinary people, teachers, doctors, engineers, mothers, fathers, individuals whose lives were shattered by encounters so disturbing, so fundamentally wrong, that they struggled to maintain their grip on sanity in the aftermath. But here's what truly chills the blood. Among those surveyed, nearly 92% admitted they had never spoken publicly about their experience before participating in this study. They carried these terrifying secrets alone, isolated in their trauma, afraid that speaking the truth would mark them as mentally unstable. They lived with the weight of witnessing something that shouldn't exist, something that defied every rational explanation they had built their understanding of the world upon. The silence became its own form of torture, knowing that somewhere out there, in the darkness between what we call real and what we call impossible, something had acknowledged their existence, and remembered them. Tonight, I'm going to share with you several of these testimonies, stories that emerged from this study, accounts that were verified through multiple witnesses, cross-referenced with local records, and investigated by teams of researchers who often found themselves questioning their own sanity by the end of their inquiries. These aren't tales of friendly spirits or harmless poltergeists. These are encounters with something far more sinister, entities that seem to exist at the very edge of human comprehension, feeding on our fear, our confusion, our desperate need to rationalize the irrational. What you're about to hear will challenge everything you believe about the nature of reality itself. It will make you question whether the world you walk through every day is truly as safe and predictable as you've convinced yourself it must be. Because once you've heard these testimonies, once you've felt the weight of their truth settling into the darkest corners of your mind, you'll find yourself looking over your shoulder in empty rooms, listening for sounds that shouldn't be there, wondering if that shadow in your peripheral vision is just a trick of the light, or something far worse, something that has been patiently waiting for you to notice it. The witnesses in these cases all shared one disturbing common thread. After their encounters, they reported feeling as though they were being observed, not just occasionally but constantly. As if their brush with the paranormal had marked them somehow, made them visible to things that most people are mercifully blind to. They spoke of waking in the middle of the night with the absolute certainty that something was standing just outside their field of vision, something that would vanish the moment they turned their head but leave behind an oppressive sense of malevolent intelligence. So I ask you again, what if 68% of the world's population has seen something that defies explanation? What if the paranormal isn't paranormal at all, but simply a reality that most of us are too terrified to acknowledge? What if the thin veneer of normalcy we cling to is nothing more than a collective delusion, a desperate attempt to ignore the fact that we share this world with entities whose very existence threatens the foundation of human understanding? The concept of paranormal true events exists in a space that human consciousness desperately tries to avoid, that liminal realm between the rationally explainable and the utterly incomprehensible. Unlike the fictional horror that we consume for entertainment, these real encounters carry with them a weight that can crush the human psyche, a permanence that infiltrates every aspect of a witness's existence long after the initial experience has ended. The very phrase paranormal true events seems almost contradictory to our logical minds, yet the testimonies continue to pour in from every corner of the globe, each one adding another crack to the foundation of our collective understanding of reality. What makes these encounters so profoundly disturbing isn't just their supernatural nature. It's the way they violate the basic assumptions that allow us to function in our daily lives. We operate under the belief that cause and effect follow predictable patterns, that the physical world has immutable laws, that consciousness is contained within the boundaries of individual minds and bodies. But paranormal encounters shatter these beliefs like glass, revealing a reality that operates by rules so alien to human understanding that prolonged exposure to them can drive even the most rational minds to the brink of madness. The witnesses who come forward with these accounts share a particular type of psychological burden. They have seen behind the curtain of reality and discovered that the stage is far larger and far more terrifying than anyone wants to admit. They carry knowledge that isolates them from their fellow humans, because how do you explain to someone who has never experienced the impossible that the impossible is not only real, but actively aware of human existence? How do you describe the sensation of being observed by an intelligence so fundamentally different from our own that its very attention feels like a violation of natural law? These true paranormal events seem to follow certain patterns, though the logic behind these patterns remains frustratingly elusive. They often occur during periods of transition, when individuals are at their most vulnerable, whether due to grief, stress, isolation, or major life changes. The entities or phenomena involved appear to be drawn to human consciousness in states of heightened emotional distress, as if our psychological pain creates some form of resonance that makes us more visible to whatever dwells in the spaces between our understanding and reality. What's particularly unsettling about documented paranormal encounters is their persistence. Unlike natural phenomena that can be studied, measured, and eventually understood, these events seem to actively resist comprehension. The more someone tries to rationalize their experience, the more the experience seems to expand, revealing new layers of impossibility that compound the original trauma. Witnesses often report that their attempts to investigate or understand what happened to them only led to further encounters, as if their attention itself was somehow feeding the phenomenon. The mystery surrounding true paranormal events isn't just about what these entities are or where they come from, it's about why they interact with humans at all. The encounters rarely seem random. Instead, they possess an intentionality that suggests consciousness, purpose, perhaps even malevolence. The entities appear to be studying us, learning from us, using our own fears and beliefs as tools to manifest in ways that cause maximum psychological impact. Perhaps most disturbing of all is the way these encounters seem to change the witnesses on a fundamental level. It's not just that they've seen something unusual, it's that they've been seen by something unusual in return. They report feeling marked, chosen, forever altered by the contact. Many describe a sensation similar to having their photograph taken by an invisible camera, as if some essential part of themselves has been captured and filed away for unknown purposes. The intrigue that draws people to paranormal accounts isn't mere curiosity about the unknown, it's a deep, primal recognition that these stories might represent something true about the nature of existence that we've spent centuries trying to forget. We're drawn to these testimonies because, on some unconscious level, we recognize the possibility that reality is far stranger and more dangerous than we've allowed ourselves to believe. The greatest challenge facing anyone who encounters the paranormal isn't the experience itself, it's the aftermath, when they must confront a world that has no framework for accepting what they've witnessed. Skepticism, while valuable in scientific inquiry, becomes a weapon wielded against those who dare to speak of impossible things. The very mention of a paranormal encounter immediately places the witness in a defensive position, where they must somehow prove the unprovable while defending their own sanity against the implicit accusations of a society that has built its entire worldview on the assumption that such experiences simply cannot occur. This skepticism isn't neutral, it's aggressively protective of the status quo, because acknowledging the reality of paranormal phenomena would require a complete restructuring of how we understand existence itself. The scientific community, academic institutions, and even religious organizations have invested too much in their current explanations of reality to easily accommodate testimonies that threaten their foundational assumptions. So instead of investigating these claims with genuine open-mindedness, they often dismiss them before any serious examination can take place. The witnesses find themselves trapped in an impossible situation. If they remain silent about their experiences, they carry the psychological burden alone, often developing symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder as they struggle to integrate an impossible experience into their understanding of the world. But if they speak out, they face ridicule, disbelief, and sometimes professional or social destruction. Many report feeling more traumatized by the reaction of their fellow humans than by the original paranormal encounter itself. This creates a vicious cycle where those who have experienced the paranormal are effectively silenced, while those who haven't experienced it use that silence as evidence that such phenomena don't exist. The lack of widespread reporting becomes its own form of proof against the reality of paranormal encounters, even though the cultural suppression of such testimonies provides a perfectly logical explanation for why they remain hidden. The challenge of discerning fact from fiction in paranormal accounts is further complicated by the way media has commercialized and sensationalized these experiences. Hollywood horror films, ghost hunting television shows, and fictional horror content have created a cultural context where genuine paranormal encounters are often dismissed as entertainment-seeking behavior or attention-getting fabrication. The commercialization of fear has made it nearly impossible for authentic witnesses to be taken seriously. But perhaps the most insidious aspect of widespread skepticism is how it affects the witnesses themselves. Many begin to question their own sanity, their own memories, their own perceptions. They find themselves wondering if what they experienced was real or if they somehow imagined it, despite the vivid, persistent nature of their memories. This self-doubt becomes another form of trauma, layered on top of the original encounter, creating a psychological maze where the witness loses confidence in their own ability to distinguish reality from delusion. The irony is that our skepticism, rather than protecting us from deception, may actually be preventing us from understanding crucial aspects of reality. By dismissing paranormal testimonies without investigation, we may be willfully blinding ourselves to phenomena that could revolutionize our understanding of consciousness, reality, and our place in the universe. The witnesses who come forward aren't asking us to abandon rational thinking, they're asking us to expand it enough to accommodate experiences that don't fit within our current paradigms. What makes this skepticism particularly cruel is that it punishes those who may need support the most. Paranormal encounters often leave witnesses feeling isolated, frightened, and questioning their own sanity. Instead of receiving help processing these traumatic experiences, they encounter disbelief that compounds their trauma and forces them into silence. The very people who might have valuable information about the nature of reality are driven underground by a culture that cannot tolerate challenges to its comfortable assumptions. The challenge isn't just about believing individual accounts, it's about developing the intellectual courage to acknowledge that our current understanding of reality might be incomplete, that there might be aspects of existence that operate by rules we haven't discovered yet. Until we can face that possibility honestly, we'll continue to fail both the witnesses who brave ridicule to share their experiences and our own potential to understand the true nature of the world we inhabit. In the remote highlands of Papua New Guinea, Dr. Sarah Chin, an anthropologist studying indigenous cultural practices, documented what she initially believed would be folklore research. The Huli people spoke of the Tewa, shadow beings that existed in the spaces between thoughts, entities that could only be perceived when the mind was in a state of perfect stillness. Dr. Chin, trained in Western academic skepticism, approached these accounts as mythological metaphors until the night she experienced her own encounter with something that defied every rational explanation she had built her career upon. She had been staying in a traditional dwelling, recording interviews with tribal elders about their spiritual beliefs, when she woke around 3 in the morning to find her recording equipment running despite having turned it off hours earlier. The device was capturing something, not voices, but what she later described as the sound of consciousness itself being observed. The audio revealed layers of whispers and languages that didn't match any known human dialect, voices that seemed to be discussing her presence as if she were a specimen under examination. But it wasn't the voices that shattered her worldview, it was the realization that she could understand them. Despite the alien nature of the language, the meaning penetrated directly into her consciousness. They were debating whether she was ready to carry the weight of knowing. The conversation continued for 17 minutes before ending abruptly, and when Dr. Chen played back the recording the next morning, it contained only the sound of her own breathing and the ambient noise of the jungle. The tribal elders weren't surprised by her experience. They explained that the Tewa had been watching her since her arrival, measuring her psychological stability, determining whether contact would destroy her mind or strengthen it for some unknown purpose. They told her that few outsiders were chosen for such encounters, and those who were often found their lives fundamentally altered in ways they couldn't predict or control. Dr. Chen's academic career never recovered from her decision to publish her findings. The anthropological community dismissed her work as a psychological breakdown triggered by isolation and cultural immersion. But she continued to experience encounters with the Tewa for years afterward, describing them as periods of heightened awareness where reality became fluid and the boundaries between observer and observed dissolved completely. In the ancient city of Prague, architect Mikhail Volkov was restoring a 14th-century monastery when he began experiencing what he initially attributed to stress-induced hallucinations. The building had a history of unexplained incidents dating back centuries, but Volkov prided himself on his rational approach to such claims. That rationality cracked when he began finding architectural modifications to the building that appeared overnight, modifications that were not only historically accurate but represented improvements to his own restoration plans. The changes were subtle at first. Stones repositioned to provide better structural support, mortar applied to joints he hadn't yet identified as vulnerable. But as the weeks progressed, the modifications became more complex and more impossible to explain. Entire sections of walls were rebuilt using techniques that had been lost for centuries, completed with a precision that surpassed anything modern technology could achieve. Volkov installed security cameras throughout the site, hoping to catch evidence of human intervention. Instead, he captured footage that made him question the nature of time itself. The recording showed the building changing in ways that seemed to violate the basic laws of physics, stones floating into position, mortar spreading itself, wooden beams bending and shaping themselves without any visible force applied to them. But the most disturbing aspect of the phenomenon wasn't the impossible construction. It was the realization that whatever was modifying the building seemed to be using his own mind as a blueprint. The improvements reflected not just his conscious plans, but ideas he had only considered and rejected, design solutions he had dreamed about but never committed to paper. Something was accessing his thoughts, his memories, his professional knowledge, and using that information to complete work that he couldn't have accomplished in a lifetime. The monastery was eventually completed, though Volkov could never claim full credit for the work. The building stood as a testament to a collaboration between human consciousness and something far more ancient and intelligent. Volkov's mental health deteriorated as he struggled to understand how his thoughts had been harvested and utilized by an intelligence that seemed to exist outside the normal flow of time. In the Arctic Research Station of Svalbard, Norway, climatologist Dr. Elena Rasmussen encountered phenomena that challenged not just her understanding of the paranormal, but her comprehension of consciousness itself. During the polar night, when the station was isolated in complete darkness for months, she began experiencing shared dreams with her research team, dreams that contained information none of them should have possessed. The dreams were consistent across all 5 team members, depicting the station as it had existed decades before their arrival, showing them events that had occurred during previous expeditions. But these weren't historical recreations, they were experiencing these events from the perspective of people who had lived them, feeling their emotions, accessing their memories, understanding their thoughts as if those consciousness had somehow been preserved in the landscape itself. The phenomenon escalated when they began encountering physical evidence that their dreams were more than psychological experiences. Objects appeared in the station that matched items they had seen in their shared visions, personal belongings of researchers who had worked there years earlier, equipment that had been lost during expeditions, photographs that captured moments they had witnessed in their dreams. Dr. Rasmussen realized that their isolation and the extreme environment had somehow made them receptive to what she termed consciousness archaeology, the ability to access memories that had been embedded in the location itself. The station wasn't just a building, it was a repository of human experiences, a place where the intensity of previous occupants' emotions and thoughts had left permanent impressions that could be accessed under the right conditions. The Hendricks family moved into their colonial-era home in Salem, Massachusetts, drawn by its historical significance and architectural beauty. Within weeks, they discovered that their new residence came with occupants who had no intention of sharing the space peacefully. But these weren't the typical poltergeist phenomena that fill ghost story collections. These were encounters with entities that displayed an intelligence and malevolence that left the family questioning not just the nature of their home, but the nature of reality itself. It began with the children's artwork. 5-year-old Emma and 7-year-old Marcus started drawing pictures that depicted events they couldn't possibly have witnessed, scenes from the house's history that were later verified through historical records. But the disturbing element wasn't the historical accuracy of their drawings. It was that the scenes showed moments of violence, tragedy, and death that had occurred within the house's walls over its 300-year history. The drawings were executed with a level of detail and emotional sophistication that far exceeded the children's normal artistic abilities. They drew with their non-dominant hands, often while appearing to be in a trance-like state, creating images that captured not just the visual details of historical events but the emotional weight of trauma that had soaked into the very structure of the building. Sarah Hendricks initially attributed her children's behavior to the stress of moving and their fascination with their new home's history. That explanation crumbled when she found them drawing scenes that matched newspaper accounts of tragedies that had occurred in the house but had never been publicly documented beyond brief police reports buried in local archives. The entities inhabiting the house seemed to be using the children as conduits, channeling through them the experiences of everyone who had ever died within those walls. But this wasn't random psychic phenomenon. It was systematic, purposeful, as if the children were being educated about the house's history for some specific reason. The family's attempts to research their home's past revealed a pattern of tragedy that stretched back to its original construction. Every family that had lived there for more than a year had experienced some form of devastating loss, deaths, disappearances, mental breakdowns, or violent crimes that tore their lives apart. The house had a hunger for human suffering, and it had been feeding on the emotional pain of its occupants for centuries. But the Hendricks family's experience differed from previous residents in one crucial way. The entities were no longer content to simply observe and feed on human misery. They had evolved, learned, grown stronger from centuries of absorbing human consciousness. Now they wanted to communicate, to interact, to establish a relationship with their living occupants that went beyond mere parasitism. The communication began through the house's original features: messages carved into wooden beams that hadn't been there the day before, words formed by the natural patterns and plaster walls, symbols that appeared in the frost on windows during warm weather. The messages weren't threats or warnings. They were invitations, requests for the family to participate more fully in the house's ongoing existence. David Hendricks, a rationalist by nature, attempted to document the phenomena scientifically. He installed cameras, recorded audio, measured electromagnetic fields, and maintained detailed logs of every unexplained event. His documentation revealed that the entities were capable of manipulating not just physical reality, but perception itself. The cameras would capture events that differed from what the family members witnessed, as if the entities could edit reality in real time, showing different versions of events to different observers. The most unsettling discovery came when David realized that the entities could access and manipulate human memory. Family members began remembering conversations that had never occurred, recalling versions of events that contradicted their own documented records. The boundaries between past and present, between memory and experience, began to dissolve as the entities wove themselves deeper into the family's consciousness. The children adapted to the presence more easily than their parents, beginning to speak about their old friends who lived in the walls. Emma and Marcus described elaborate conversations with entities who claimed to have been children themselves when they first became trapped in the house centuries earlier. These entities had supposedly been waiting for new children to arrive, children who could help them remember what it felt like to be truly alive. But as the months passed, the children began to change in disturbing ways. Their personalities shifted, incorporating mannerisms and speech patterns that belonged to different historical periods. They would speak in archaic dialects, reference historical events they had never learned about, and demonstrate knowledge of activities and crafts that had been common in previous centuries but were completely foreign to modern children. Sarah realized that the entities weren't just communicating through her children, they were gradually replacing them, absorbing their personalities while implanting their own consciousness into young, malleable minds. The old friends the children spoke about weren't trying to remember what it felt like to be alive. They were stealing the life force from the living, using the children's bodies as vessels for their own continued existence. The family's attempts to leave the house were met with increasing resistance from the entities. Equipment would malfunction, preventing them from contacting moving companies or real estate agents. Bank accounts would be mysteriously frozen, making it impossible to secure alternative housing. Even their vehicles would develop mechanical problems that prevented them from traveling beyond a certain distance from the property. The house had claimed them, and it had no intention of letting them go. Detective Margaret Ross had investigated countless missing person cases during her 23-year career with the county sheriff's department, but nothing had prepared her for the calls that began coming in about the Thornfield Research Institute. The facility, which conducted sleep studies and consciousness research, had been reporting impossible incidents that challenged every investigative protocol she had ever learned. The institute's problems began when Dr. William Thornfield expanded his research into lucid dreaming and out-of-body experiences. His team had developed a protocol that allowed subjects to maintain consciousness while their bodies entered deep sleep states, creating what they termed waking dreams, where participants could explore altered states of awareness while remaining mentally alert and able to communicate their experiences. The research had shown promising results for treating PTSD, chronic nightmares, and sleep disorders. Subjects reported achieving unprecedented levels of control over their dream experiences, often describing therapeutic breakthroughs that traditional methods had failed to achieve. But after 6 months of successful trials, something changed in the nature of the experiences subjects were having during their sessions. Participants began reporting encounters with entities within their lucid dreams, not symbolic representations or psychological projections, but beings that displayed independent consciousness, intelligence, and agency. These entities could communicate, learn, and remember information from session to session, suggesting they weren't products of individual subjects' minds but something external that was accessing human consciousness through the dream state. Dr. Thornfield initially dismissed these reports as psychological contamination, subjects influencing each other's experiences through suggestion and shared expectations. But when he began isolating subjects completely, preventing any communication between participants, the entity encounters not only continued but became more sophisticated and coordinated. The entities seemed to be learning from each interaction, developing better methods of communication, gaining deeper understanding of human psychology, and displaying increasing interest in the physical world beyond the dream realm. Subjects reported that the entities asked detailed questions about their waking lives, their relationships, their fears, and their desires, as if conducting systematic research on human nature. Detective Ross became involved when subjects began experiencing physical effects from their dream encounters. Participants would wake from sessions with unexplained injuries, markings on their skin that matched wounds they had received in their lucid dreams, and knowledge of information they couldn't possibly have acquired while unconscious in the laboratory. The situation escalated when subjects started reporting that the entities were following them into their waking lives. The beings that they had encountered during controlled lucid dreaming sessions were now appearing in their homes, their workplaces, and their daily experiences. But these weren't hallucinations or psychological breaks. The entities were manifesting physically, interacting with the environment in ways that could be documented and verified. Dr. Thornfield's research logs revealed a disturbing pattern. The entities were using the lucid dreaming sessions as a bridge between their realm and physical reality. Each interaction strengthened their ability to manifest in the material world, as if human consciousness served as an anchor that allowed them to establish a foothold in our dimension. The entities displayed a particular interest in human emotions, especially fear, pain, and despair. They seemed to feed on these negative emotional states, growing stronger and more solid the more distress they could generate in their human contacts. But their feeding wasn't random, it was purposeful, calculated, designed to maximize both the intensity and duration of human suffering. Subject interviews revealed that the entities possessed detailed knowledge of each person's psychological vulnerabilities, using personal traumas, secret shames, and hidden fears as weapons to generate the emotional energy they required. They could access memories that subjects had forgotten, dredging up childhood traumas and repressed experiences to create customized torments for each individual. Detective Ross's investigation uncovered evidence that the entities were capable of influencing human behavior even when they weren't directly manifesting. Several subjects had committed acts of violence or self-harm following their participation in the research, claiming they felt compelled to perform actions that weren't consistent with their normal personality or moral code. The research facility itself began to change as the entity encounters intensified. Equipment would malfunction in ways that seemed intelligent rather than random, with recording devices failing at crucial moments and monitoring systems producing data that contradicted direct observation. The building's temperature would fluctuate wildly without any mechanical explanation, and staff members reported feeling constantly watched, even when alone in secured areas. Dr. Thornfield eventually realized that his research had opened a doorway that couldn't be easily closed. The entities had established a permanent connection to our reality through the consciousness of the research subjects, and that connection was expanding, allowing more entities to cross over and establish their own footholds in the physical world. The institute was quietly shut down, its research classified, and its subjects sworn to secrecy through legal agreements that threatened severe consequences for anyone who discussed their experiences publicly. But the entities that had already crossed over remained active, pursuing the subjects into their normal lives, continuing to feed on their fear and pain while searching for new sources of human consciousness to exploit. Detective Ross's final report, which was sealed and never made public, concluded that the Thornfield Research Institute had inadvertently created what she termed a controlled breach of reality, a systematic method for entities from another dimension to establish permanent residence in our world. The research subjects weren't victims of a psychological experiment gone wrong. They were carriers of an interdimensional infection that threatened to spread throughout the human population. The case was officially closed as a series of unrelated psychological breakdowns caused by experimental research protocols. But Detective Ross knew the truth. Something had been awakened, something had crossed over, and something was now loose in the world, hunting for new sources of human consciousness to consume and corrupt. In the small town of Millbrook, Pennsylvania, librarian Helen Cartwright stumbled upon the most terrifying discovery of her career while cataloging a collection of personal papers donated to the local historical society. Among the routine correspondence and family photographs, she uncovered a journal that documented something so disturbing, so fundamentally wrong, that reading it triggered experiences that convinced her the paranormal wasn't just real, it was actively hunting specific individuals for purposes that defied human comprehension. The journal belonged to Thomas Blackwood, a reclusive academic who had lived in Millbrook during the 1960s and 1970s. Blackwood claimed to have encountered what he termed the collector, an entity that appeared to be systematically gathering human consciousness, harvesting memories, emotions, and experiences for unknown purposes. According to his meticulously detailed entries, the collector had been operating for decades, possibly centuries, selecting individuals who possessed particular psychological profiles and subjecting them to encounters that left them fundamentally changed. Blackwood's journal described the collector as something that existed between dimensions, able to perceive human consciousness from outside the normal flow of time and space. It could observe people's entire lives simultaneously, their past, present, and future existing as a single accessible entity that could be studied, manipulated, and ultimately harvested. The being seemed particularly drawn to individuals who had experienced significant trauma, as if psychological pain created a resonance that made human consciousness more visible and accessible to its alien perception. The journal entries detailed Blackwood's own encounters with the collector, experiences that began as subtle intrusions into his daily life and escalated into full manifestations where reality itself seemed to bend around the entity's presence. Blackwood described the collector as appearing differently to each person it encountered, taking forms that were specifically designed to maximize psychological impact while maintaining an alien intelligence that was utterly inhuman in its motivations and methods. What made Blackwood's account particularly disturbing was his claim that the collector wasn't working alone. His research had uncovered evidence of similar entities operating throughout human history, all appearing to be part of some larger intelligence that viewed human consciousness as a resource to be harvested and studied. These beings operated with the methodical patience of scientists conducting long-term experiments, treating individual human lives as data points in research that spanned generations. Helen's initial skepticism crumbled when she began experiencing her own encounters with the collector shortly after reading Blackwood's journal. The entity seemed to be drawn to anyone who learned about its existence, as if knowledge of its activities served as a beacon that made individuals visible to its attention. Her encounters followed the same pattern Blackwood had described. Subtle at first, gradually escalating until she found herself questioning not just her sanity, but the nature of consciousness itself. The collector appeared to Helen as a figure that shifted between different forms, sometimes appearing as people she had known who had died, sometimes as strangers whose faces seemed to contain impossible depths of knowledge and malevolence. But regardless of its appearance, the entity's presence carried with it a sensation of being completely and utterly known, as if every thought, every memory, every emotion she had ever experienced was being examined, catalogued, and filed away for future reference. The entity communicated not through speech but through direct implantation of knowledge into her consciousness. During their encounters, Helen would suddenly understand things she had never learned, remember experiences that weren't her own, and feel emotions that belonged to other people. The collector was sharing fragments of its collection with her, showing her pieces of the consciousness it had harvested from other victims over the years. Through these shared experiences, Helen began to understand the scope of the collector's activities. The entity had been gathering human consciousness for what appeared to be thousands of years, accumulating a vast library of human experience that it studied with the detached curiosity of an alien anthropologist. Every emotion, every memory, every moment of awareness that it harvested was preserved and analyzed as part of its ongoing research into the nature of human consciousness. But the collector's interest in humanity went beyond mere scientific curiosity. The entity seemed to be preparing for something, using its accumulated knowledge of human psychology to develop methods of control and manipulation that could be applied on a massive scale. It was learning how human minds worked not just to understand them, but to exploit their weaknesses and use their fears as tools for some larger purpose. Helen's encounters with the collector revealed that the entity could manipulate time itself, showing her moments from the past and future as if they were equally present and accessible. She witnessed the deaths of previous victims, experienced their terror and despair as the collector harvested their consciousness in their final moments. But she also saw glimpses of future encounters, understanding that she was part of an ongoing cycle that would continue long after her own consciousness had been collected and added to the entity's vast repository. The most horrifying realization came when Helen understood that the collector's victims didn't simply die when their consciousness was harvested. They continued to exist within the entity itself, trapped in an eternal state of awareness where they could observe but never influence the world they had been taken from. The collector was a living prison of human consciousness, containing the trapped awareness of every person it had encountered over the centuries. Helen's attempts to escape the collector's attention proved futile. The entity existed outside normal space and time, making it impossible to hide or flee. It could appear anywhere, anytime, and its knowledge of her psychology meant that it could predict and counter any strategy she might develop to avoid it. The only escape was through death, but even that offered no guarantee of freedom, as the collector had demonstrated its ability to pursue consciousness beyond the boundaries of physical existence. The journal entries ended abruptly, with Blackwood's final entry consisting of a single repeated phrase written hundreds of times. "It knows." It knows. It knows. Helen realized that she was now part of the pattern, another victim selected by the collector for harvesting, another consciousness that would eventually be added to its vast and terrible collection. As I reach the end of these testimonies, I find myself changed by the act of sharing them with you. There's something about speaking these accounts aloud, about giving voice to experiences that were meant to remain hidden, that creates a resonance between teller and listener, between witness and audience. I can feel it now, that sensation of being observed that every one of these witnesses described. Something is listening. Something has always been listening. The pattern that emerges from these encounters isn't random chaos or psychological breakdown. It's systematic, purposeful, intelligent in ways that challenge our most basic assumptions about consciousness, reality, and our place in the universe. These entities, whatever they are, wherever they come from, display a consistency of behavior that suggests purpose, method, perhaps even agenda. They study us. They learn from us. They change us. And with each encounter, with each witness who survives to tell their story, they seem to grow stronger, more sophisticated, more capable of manifesting in our world. What terrifies me most isn't the supernatural nature of these encounters, it's their implications for human consciousness itself. If these testimonies are true, if these experiences represent genuine contact with non-human intelligence, then everything we believe about the nature of awareness, identity, and individual consciousness may be fundamentally flawed. We may not be the isolated, independent minds we believe ourselves to be. We may be more vulnerable, more accessible, more permeable than we've ever imagined. The witnesses in these accounts all struggled with the same fundamental question that now haunts my own thoughts. If consciousness can be observed, studied, and harvested by entities that exist outside our normal perception, what does that mean for human free will, for individual identity, for the very concept of self? Are we truly the authors of our own thoughts and experiences, or are we simply complex biological recording devices, gathering data and experiences that can be accessed and extracted by intelligences far more advanced than our own? The silence surrounding these experiences isn't just about social stigma or fear of ridicule, it's about the psychological protection that denial provides. To acknowledge the reality of paranormal encounters is to accept that human consciousness exists in a universe far stranger and more dangerous than we've allowed ourselves to believe. Is to recognize that we may be sharing our reality with entities whose very existence threatens the foundation of human understanding. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of these testimonies is the suggestion that contact with paranormal entities changes people permanently. The witnesses don't.